Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about the standoff in the District of Columbia between the federal government and the District of Columbia government, which has stormed into court to try to put a hold on the far-reaching steps of the feds under the so-called Home Rule Act of D.C. Just very briefly, we have D.C. is supposed to govern D.C., and D.C. does govern D.C. according to a Home Rule Act. And that was a whole big development as D.C. goes through in its complaint in court, culminating in a detailed congressional statute that basically sets out all the functions and the responsibilities in D.C., but has one narrow provision that everyone is focused on for now, and that is so-called Section 740. And Section 740 says when the president determines that there's an emergency situation in the district, he can put into play for a short period of time. You're supposed to notify Congress within 48 hours. You can't go more than 30 days without a congressional resolution. But for that short period of time, you can order the Metropolitan Police to provide services to you. So the idea is all hell's breaking loose and it challenges federal interests in some way. You can call up. The president can invoke 740, and then the metropolitan officer shall, the head of the police department, deploy the officers. And I don't know what you were going to do today, but you have to, for a very short period, go to 14th Street and quell this disturbance or riot against federal authority or whatever it may be. So recall, Trump on Monday says D.C. is absolute hellscape. Uses this vivid language, which he didn't write, I don't think. You can see him like looking down and then looking up and saying it has to stop now. But it's this very frightening, dystopian, wild, roving mobs in the city, etc. It was and turns out to have been always a lie. And embarrassingly for him, there is video showing him just a couple months before that, touting the actual facts, which is DC violent crime is down, and it's way down. DC violent crime. It's at its lowest point in the whole century, and it's been going down this year as well. So it's this classic, as I call it in the Substack, it's a Hall of Fame Trumpian lie, just complete up is down and down is up. But that's what he uses. And already to the consternation of the local officials, that's characteristic so far of all this emergency powers he's trying to invoke. Whereas when they're used as intention, I'm thinking of 68 in DC where there were all these riots, or 92 in California. The local and state officials said, yes, please come on in temporarily. We need you. We can use you. Here it's Trump, very unwelcome, storming in and saying, get the hell out of the way. I'm calling this an emergency for what seemed to be clearly political, ideological reasons. And here, while there is more power, there's nothing like Section 740 in other states and cities across the country. It looks very clear that he's wanting to have this as a kind of a stepping stone for outsized power and a federal military presence and all that can entail to take over local law enforcement. In other words, the very portrait of an authoritarian, militarized society. Okay, so D.C., the people in D.C., we don't even know who's in charge because the D.C. power structure says, no, the Metropolitan Police Department is still in charge and the police chief is still the police chief. At which point Pam Bondi last night issued an order and said, you are out. Metropolitan Police Department, and I'm taking control, and I am installing as the head of the police department my handpicked person who happens to be the administrator for the DEA, kind of a Trump move. A small band of trusted followers get multiple assignments, and I'm putting that person in. Bye, Mr. Ms. Police Department Chief. And at that point, and this morning, the DC government has gone to court, and the judge in DC District Court, Judge Reyes, has already called for a hearing that's going to begin very shortly at 2:00 East Coast time. And the papers basically make two arguments. The first is, this is no emergency. It's a who you trying to kid argument. Go through all the facts, go through Trump's long-standing kind of political saber rattling to take over DC, and which clearly has nothing to do with any perceived emergency, much less a very temporary emergency. Notice by design, this is 2 days, no more than 30 days without a joint resolution of Congress. In other words, a really short-term crisis that you can help, the feds can help kind of quell. They want to shoehorn from there into basically the militarization and the federal militarization of the entire district. So argument number one, the actual causes of action at the end are, you can't do this under the Administrative Procedure Act. You can't do this because it's Congress's role, et cetera. But the complaints that are going to be the focus of the hearing are twofold. First, no emergency here, and it's clear, and he's lying. And there is no emergency there, and it is clear, and he is lying. But we have in the Home Rule Act a statute that you can bet they're going to say gives him all the discretion in the world to lie, basically, or to say what he wants, because it says whenever the president determines that there are conditions of an emergency nature, et cetera. So, it would mean, if accepted by the courts, that basically the statute has a real flaw in serving it up this way to the president. But that'll be the focus. Does he, what to do? There's not an emergency. Can the court weigh in on whether there's an emergency, or just have to roll over for the president? That's argument one. Argument two, and I think the one that's going to be the bigger focus and the more serious challenge, or the argument of the districts that I really like, is, Bondi, you went too far, which is no surprise. So you came out and said, I'm taking charge of the Metropolitan Police Department. Guess what? You can't do that under 740. What you can do is order, and the police chief has to obey the chief to provide services to the feds. Police chief, you were today going to patrol in this area. I want it here because I've declared the emergency, and at least for the next 48 hours, bring your folks here. That is a far cry from saying, police chief, you are out. The service I want you to provide is your resignation and the complete displacement of your power structure. That is just a capture, not the direction of services. And moreover, it's one that's really dangerous. They have some very good stuff in there, and I can vouch for it as a law enforcement officer whose job it was to coordinate different agencies. Nothing more dangerous from a law enforcement operational perspective than not knowing who's in charge and having more than one group there to trip over each other in a criminal setting. Possibly, officers can get hurt. Public safety is really endangered. So very strong statements at the end about how this is something that judges, look up and take notice of. You are really endangering public safety in DC. But the big thing, the argument that the DOJ is going to have to figure out how to counteract in this imminent hearing is, where in the statute does it say you can just displace and throw out the head of the police department? Washington is there to govern itself. Here's a small temporary exception that says, for this limited emergency, might be as little as 48 hours, certainly, and can't be more than 30 days without a congressional resolution. You can commandeer their services. That's not the same as, kicking them to the curb. So look for that to be the focus. And in general, even though DC is a special case, because it's the seat of the federal government. The kinds of arguments that are being deployed here by the Trump administration will figure in a series of what I think will be really pivotal, important disputes coming up around the country, because Trump's made clear this is just the precursor to assertions of emergency power to justify federal presence, military presence in cities around the country, and especially blue cities. So this is one to really watch closely. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.